There is no other way than negotiation. I just told the American team yesterday that they are present at the negotiating table and they are in the same area because they have tried other ways. This comprehensive agreement will ultimately lead to the establishment of a right that is fully recognized and respected by the people of Iran. And we will be able to properly exercise our fundamental right. We don't want anyone to recognize our right. Our right is official. Our right exists. We want to be respected for our right. The President of the United States, the current President of the United States, we serve as international diplomats because we are fundamentally logical people, because we have a significant say in these matters and a clear sense of logic. We believe in the power of reason and the importance of our voices in every discussion, ensuring that our diplomatic efforts are always guided by sound judgment and a commitment to rational thought in all our global interactions. If they break the diplomacy, we will follow the same path. If they speak to the people of Iran in a respectful manner, we will respond in a respectful manner. If they speak to us in a strong manner, we will respond in a strong manner. I don't want to,
without delving into far too much unnecessary detail at this particular moment,
about these stories. We have faced a new challenge. Thank you. International rules, international rights, all of these are different. What is that theory that the US President introduced in the beginning of his work? That I will act based on the idea of peace through force. For us, becoming
strong is a compulsion. One of the fundamental and essential components in war of becoming a truly formidable and influential force is the inherent power of resilience and resistance. That is to say, one must be fully able to effectively withstand and resist these various external pressures. If the enemy comes around you and you say, very well, what do you want to do? That means the job is done. And then it is not known how long this resistance will last.
Fear in this situation is the death penalty for me. If you come to fear and to be short, some say that they recommend compromise. If you compromise, this compromise is not the end for me. The biggest challenge we face now is the challenge of stability. This stability is both for the armed forces and for the government and its powers, those that are able to finance the economy of the country and the people's livelihood. And it is also for diplomacy, which can keep the flag of the Islamic Republic high in the sky.
Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has delivered a defiant message to the United States from the heart of Tehran. Speaking at the first National Congress on Foreign Policy and the History of Foreign Relations, Araghchi told the audience that the American military buildup in the region does not frighten Iran, and described the Iranian people as both a people of diplomacy and a people of war. His remarks, delivered just 2 days after the latest round of indirect nuclear talks in Muscat, represent one of the most direct and combative public statements a senior Iranian diplomat has made since tensions escalated following the June 2025 war. Araghchi opened by addressing the diplomatic track directly. He told the audience that there is no alternative to negotiation, and revealed that this was the same message he delivered to the American team 2 days earlier in Muscat. He said the presence of both sides at the negotiating table is based on this logic because, in his words, other paths have been tried. But he placed firm conditions on what negotiations must look like. He said talks will bear fruit only when the rights of the Iranian people are acknowledged and respected, and when Iran can exercise those rights freely. He added that Iran does not need anyone to recognize its rights, because those rights are already established and exist independently of foreign recognition. What Iran demands, he said, is that those rights be respected. The tone then shifted sharply. Araghchi addressed the American military presence in the region head-on, stating that even now, their military posture in our region does not frighten us. He then delivered the line that has drawn the most attention from international media and regional analysts. He said, "We are a people of diplomacy, but we are also a people of war. We are a people of war, not that we seek war. In fact, we are a people of war. We are ready for war so that no one dares to fight us." The formulation was deliberate. Araghchi framed Iran's readiness for conflict not as aggression, but as deterrence, a posture designed to make the cost of attacking Iran so high that no adversary would consider it rational. He continued by presenting what he described as Iran's dual nature. He said Iran is a people of logic, a people with words and reason. And if the United States chooses the path of diplomacy, Iran will walk that path. If Washington speaks to the Iranian people with respect, Tehran will respond with respect. But, he warned, if they speak with force, we will respond with force. The statement establishes a framework of reciprocity that Iranian officials have used consistently in recent weeks. Iran mirrors whatever approach it receives, and the choice of whether the relationship is defined by diplomacy or confrontation belongs to Washington, not Tehran. Araghchi then turned to what he described as a fundamental shift in international affairs. He said Iran has encountered a new phenomenon that has transformed all principles of international rules and law. That phenomenon, according to Araghchi, is the theory introduced by President Trump at the beginning of his term, governing by the theory of peace through force. The framing is significant because it positions Trump's approach not as standard diplomacy backed by military capability, which has characterized American foreign policy for decades, but as something qualitatively different, a doctrine in which force is not the last resort, but the organizing principle of international relations. For Araghchi, this is not merely a rhetorical observation. It describes the reality Iran is confronting, an adversary that sends an aircraft carrier to the negotiating table, seats a four-star admiral in uniform at diplomatic talks, imposes sanctions hours after a positive meeting, and issues public threats of military action while simultaneously claiming to seek a deal. From Tehran's perspective, the theory of peace through force means that diplomacy is not an alternative to military action, but a performance conducted under its shadow. Araghchi then made the case for what he called resilience as a strategic necessity. He said becoming stronger is an obligation, and that one of the secrets to strength is the ability to stand up against pressure. He offered a vivid description of what capitulation would look like. If they bring their fleet around you and you immediately say, "Okay, fine, what do you want? Come and take it," then you're finished, and there's no telling how far that retreat would go. The statement is a direct reference to the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group currently positioned in the Arabian Sea off Iran's coast, and to the broader American naval and air buildup that has accompanied the nuclear negotiations. He concluded his remarks with what amounted to a strategic doctrine for Iran's current posture. He said, "Fear in these circumstances is a deadly poison. If you become frightened and retreat, or if you compromise, as some suggest, such compromise knows no end." He then described what he called the challenge of resistance, arguing that it rests on three pillars: the armed forces, who provide military deterrence; the government, which must deliver economic strength and livelihoods for the people; and diplomacy, which must keep the flag of the Islamic Republic aloft on the world stage. The formulation presents Iran's strategy as an integrated whole in which military, economic, and diplomatic elements reinforce each other rather than operating in isolation. The three-pillar framework also serves a domestic purpose. By acknowledging that resistance rests on the government's ability to provide economic strength and livelihoods, Araghchi is implicitly recognizing that Iran's position cannot be sustained by military deterrence alone. The December protests demonstrated that economic grievances can destabilize the country from within, and the sanctions regime is designed precisely to exploit that vulnerability. Araghchi's speech acknowledges the challenge without conceding the point. Resilience, not capitulation, is the answer to economic pressure. The venue itself carried symbolic weight. The first National Congress on Foreign Policy and the History of Foreign Relations was designed to project confidence and institutional depth at a moment when Iran's diplomatic establishment is under immense pressure. By delivering these remarks at a formal academic and policy forum rather than in a reactive press conference, Araghchi signaled that Iran's position is considered strategic and grounded in historical analysis rather than impulsive defiance. Araghchi's speech did not occur in a vacuum. It came exactly 2 days after the latest round of indirect nuclear talks between Iran and the United States in Muscat, Oman, a session that both sides described as a starting point, but that produced no substantive movement on the core issues dividing them. The talks were notable not only for their content, but for their composition. The United States brought its top military commander for the Middle East, U.S. Navy Admiral Brad Cooper, who sat in on the diplomatic session in his dress uniform. According to reporting from journalists present in Muscat, Admiral Cooper was described as the physical representation of the USS Abraham Lincoln, the aircraft carrier stationed off Iran's coast. The decision to include a uniformed military commander in what was ostensibly a diplomatic meeting breaks with standard practice. During the JCPOA negotiations that produced the 2015 deal, the American delegation was composed entirely of civilian diplomats and technical experts. The inclusion of Admiral Cooper signals a fundamentally different approach, one in which the military dimension is integrated into the diplomatic track as coercive leverage. When Araghchi told the Tehran audience that their military posture does not frighten us, he was responding directly to this tactic, rejecting the premise that the presence of warships and uniforms at the negotiating table would pressure Iran into concessions. Foreign Minister Araghchi described the Muscat exchanges as having a good start, but cautioned that further progress depends on consultations in the capitals, language that diplomats interpret as meaning no substantive concessions were made by either side. He has also categorically ruled out any discussion of Iran's missile capabilities, declaring that missile talks are impossible now or ever, a position that directly contradicts Washington's insistence that any comprehensive deal must address Iran's ballistic missile program. On the nuclear file itself, Araghchi has stated that all enriched uranium will remain inside the country, and that enrichment levels will be determined strictly based on national needs. Zero enrichment, he said in his Al Jazeera interview, is completely off the table. Under the 2015 JCPOA, Iran had agreed to limit enrichment to 3.67% and ship out most of its stockpile. After the United States withdrew from the deal in 2018, Tehran gradually exceeded those limits, eventually reaching 60% enrichment, a level that non-proliferation experts describe as a short technical step from weapons-grade material. Araghchi's insistence that enrichment levels will be based solely on national needs leaves the door open to further increases, a position Western negotiators have called unacceptable. Senior Iranian cleric Ahmad Khatami reinforced this stance by declaring that Iran did not seek nuclear energy to build an atomic bomb, but would not give up its nuclear program, adding that the country's opposition to nuclear weapons is based on religious principles. The fact that Israel possesses an undeclared nuclear arsenal that has never been subject to International Atomic Energy Agency inspections, while Iran faces sanctions, strikes, and ultimatums over a civilian nuclear program it insists is peaceful, is a point Iranian officials raise consistently. No sanctions have been imposed over Israel's refusal to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. No military strikes have been launched against Israeli nuclear facilities. For Tehran, this asymmetry is central to Araghchi's argument that the current international order enforces permanent inequality rather than genuine security. Araghchi's Tehran speech also builds on the warning he delivered in his Al Jazeera interview earlier in the week, when he stated explicitly that if the United States strikes Iran, American military bases across the Middle East will become legitimate targets. He acknowledged in that interview that Iran cannot hit the U.S. mainland, but said it can and will respond where American forces are stationed. A statement that puts dozens of military installations across the Gulf, Iraq, Syria, and the broader region squarely in the crosshairs. When he tells the Tehran Congress that Iran is a people of war and ready for conflict, the specific form of that readiness has already been publicly defined. In that same Al Jazeera interview, Araghchi drew a sharp distinction between the nuclear file and the missile program. By agreeing to discuss enrichment while categorically refusing to discuss missiles, Iran is attempting to separate the two issues that Washington has sought to link into a single comprehensive framework. This creates a structural impasse in the negotiations, because the Trump administration has repeatedly stated that any new deal must address missiles, while Tehran has declared this will never happen. For Iran, the missile arsenal represents the primary deterrent that compensates for the absence of a modern air force comparable to its regional rivals. And it is the one capability that gives operational meaning to Araghchi's warning that Iran is ready for war. Without the missiles, the warning would be empty. With them, it carries the weight of a demonstrated capability that includes the Khorramshahr 4, with a claimed range of 2,000 kilometers, deployed from underground facilities designed to survive preemptive strikes. The military dimension of Iran's messaging was reinforced separately by Chief of Staff Major General Abdul Rahim Mousavi, who, in a message marking Iran's Air Force Day, warned that any military action against the Islamic Republic would end in absolute and strategic defeat for Iran's enemies. Mousavi said even a limited strike would not remain localized, but could expand into a broader regional conflict. He stressed that Iran's response would be coordinated across all branches of the armed forces and would impose heavy and irreparable costs on both attackers and their supporters, a phrase that signals retaliation could extend to countries hosting U.S. military installations. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei amplified both messages by addressing Trump directly in a public statement. He said, according to Iranian state media, "The Americans must be aware that if they wage a war this time, it will be a regional war." Khamenei also dismissed American military posturing, saying Washington should not try to scare the Iranian nation because it will not be affected by such remarks and does not fear rightful confrontation. The convergence of messaging from Araghchi, Mousavi, and Khamenei within the same week suggests a coordinated communication strategy designed to ensure that Washington, the Gulf capitals, and every country hosting American troops understand that Iran's warnings are not rhetorical. What a regional war would actually mean in practice is something military analysts have been modeling for years. Iran's network of allied groups stretches from Yemen to Iraq to Lebanon to Syria. The Houthis have demonstrated their ability to disrupt global shipping by striking more than 100 vessels in the Red Sea, according to international shipping reports. Kataib Hezbollah in Iraq has carried out more than 170 attacks on U.S. forces between October 2023 and February 2024, according to Pentagon reporting. A regional war would activate multiple fronts simultaneously, creating a multi-axis threat that no single military force can contain from one theater. The Strait of Hormuz, through which approximately 20% of the world's oil passes, would also be at risk. Iran has repeatedly signaled that the strait would not remain open in a full-scale conflict, a threat that energy analysts and shipping companies take seriously. The January 2020 strike on Al-Assad Air Base in Iraq, following the U.S. assassination of General Qasem Soleimani, demonstrated that Tehran will target American positions on foreign soil when it considers its red lines crossed. That strike caused traumatic brain injuries to dozens of U.S. service members and showed that Iran possesses both the willingness and the precision to hit specific military targets. The current warnings from Mousavi, Khamenei, and Araghchi suggest that any future response would be significantly larger in both scale and scope. On the American side, the pressure campaign continues to escalate. President Trump signed an executive order imposing secondary sanctions through tariffs on countries importing Iranian goods, targeting Tehran's oil lifeline. The US Treasury announced fresh sanctions on 14 vessels, 15 entities, and 2 individuals linked to Iran's oil trade, including ships flagged from Turkey, India, and the United Arab Emirates. The sanctions were announced just hours after the Muscat talks concluded, a sequence that Tehran has cited as evidence that Washington is not negotiating in good faith. Reports suggest that the sanctions on vessels from Turkey, India, and the UAE indicate increasing pressure on countries facilitating trade with Iran. Some of these countries are simultaneously engaged in diplomatic efforts to mediate between the United States and Iran, raising questions about whether the sanctions undermine those mediation channels. The cumulative impact of sanctions on Iran's economy has been severe. The Iranian rial has lost substantial value, inflation has remained in double digits for years, and the purchasing power of ordinary Iranians has been devastated. The December protests that shook the country were driven in large part by these economic consequences, creating a feedback loop in which American pressure generates domestic unrest, which Washington then uses as additional leverage. For Iran's leadership, this represents hybrid warfare designed to destabilize the country from within, and it is precisely the kind of pressure that Araghchi described in his Tehran speech as requiring the deadly poison antidote of resilience rather than capitulation. Trump has set out 2 conditions for de-escalation, telling reporters, "I told them 2 things. Number 1, no nuclear, and number 2, stop killing protesters." The linkage between the nuclear file and Iran's domestic crackdown on the December protests has been rejected by Tehran as interference in internal affairs. Araghchi has reiterated that Iran's defensive and missile capabilities will never be subject to any negotiations, while signaling readiness for what he called any serious diplomatic course that respects Iran's legal interests and concerns. Iran has also accused Trump of inflaming tensions and fueling recent domestic unrest after he publicly urged Iranians to continue to protest. The U.S. military buildup that Araghchi dismissed in his Tehran speech is extensive by any measure. The USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group is positioned in the Arabian Sea. THAAD air defense systems have been deployed at U.S. bases across the Middle East. Multiple guided missile destroyers are stationed in the region. F-15E fighter squadrons have been repositioned to Jordan, and F-35 aircraft have recently transited through Europe toward the theater. Trump himself told reporters, "We have a tremendous force going there, just like we did in Venezuela, even bigger, and they'll be there soon. And if we can't work something out, probably bad things would happen." Regional governments find themselves caught between these two positions. Gulf states have signaled through diplomatic channels that they have no interest in being caught between American military operations and Iranian retaliation, according to regional reporting. Countries hosting major U.S. installations, including Bahrain with the Fifth Fleet, Qatar with Al Udeid Air Base, and Iraq with thousands of deployed troops, understand that warnings about targeting attackers and their supporters apply directly to them. Saudi Arabia has maintained communication channels with Tehran brokered through China since the 2023 Beijing agreement. Oman continues to serve as the primary intermediary. And several Gulf capitals have signaled they have no appetite for their territory to be used in operations against Iran. These are the positions of governments that have concluded the American security umbrella cannot fully protect them from the consequences of a regional war, and that independent diplomacy with Tehran is their best insurance policy. The economic dimension adds further pressure on regional calculations. Any disruption to oil flows through the Strait of Hormuz, even a partial one, would send energy prices soaring and destabilize global markets. Gulf states that depend on stable oil revenues and maritime trade routes have a direct economic interest in preventing military escalation, regardless of their political alignment with Washington. This economic reality reinforces the diplomatic efforts to find an alternative to confrontation and explains why countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia have maintained engagement with Tehran even as American pressure intensifies. According to Axios, another round of talks between Washington and Tehran is expected within the next 13 days, but the trajectory suggests the diplomatic window is narrowing. Araghchi's Tehran speech, with its deliberate combination of openness to diplomacy and readiness for war, captures the essence of Iran's current position. It will negotiate, but only on its own terms, and it will not be frightened into concessions by aircraft carriers, sanctions, or uniforms at the table. Whether Washington interprets that position as a negotiating posture or an impasse that justifies escalation will determine what happens next. The pattern of events in recent weeks follows a trajectory that regional analysts describe as dangerously familiar. Military buildups, economic pressure, inflammatory rhetoric, and stalled diplomacy have historically created momentum toward confrontation that becomes difficult to reverse. The difference this time, according to multiple assessments, is that the consequences of miscalculation are exponentially greater. Iran's military capabilities are more advanced than at any previous point. Its willingness to strike American positions has already been demonstrated, and the American military presence in the region, while formidable, is dispersed across installations that Iran has openly identified as targets. The forces are in position on both sides. The warnings have been delivered at every level of Iran's leadership, from the supreme leader to the chief of staff to the foreign minister himself. And the next move, as Araghchi told